Inspector General report that appears to be consuming President Trump and his allies, who continue trying to spin the report as a win, even though it negates a number of their key talking points.
The actual report was something of a disaster for the FBI. That was obvious to anyone who actually read it.
Everything we have been reporting for years was dead on accurate. We were right every step of the way.
The report, as I mentioned to Hannity, is a devastating indictment of our FBI and our intel gathering apparatus.
All right, joining us now, CNN chief media correspondent Brian Stelter and CNN political commentator and former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent. Great to have both of you. Okay, let's go back to reality world instead of upside down world right now, which is what we just played a montage of. Charlie, when you hear, the talking points from obviously the Trump cheerleaders as well as some of your former Republican colleagues on Capitol Hill, do they, when Hannity says, for instance, everything we've been reporting for years has been dead on accurate, we were right every step of the way, and the report completely negates that, do they believe that? Or why are they saying that?
No, that's an absurd statement by Sean Hannity. Look, they're cherry picking what they're doing over there at Fox is they're cherry picking those pieces of the report that bolster or support their narrative. It's as simple as that. Yes, there were problems, serious problems, with the surveillance warrants for Carter Page, who's an eccentric fellow and is probably owed an apology, frankly, by the FBI. But on the big question about the origins of the probe, there was no political bias. It was open in a fair manner. No deep state conspiracy, no coup d'état. And there, the president and his supporters probably owe the rest of us an apology for spreading that nonsense all this time.
See, Brian, what I believe is that they just don't deal in nuance, and they just hope that their viewers and their voters don't either. So the idea that there was no spying, there is no deep state, there was no political bias, the viewers and the voters won't hear that. They'll just hear what Hannity's saying about that there were some mistakes, not in those categories, and that's it.
Right, there are a few cherries to be picked. It's like we're living in the world's grandest experiment for about motivated reasoning. You got to go back to Psychology 101 and what happens when you're so invested in something, you seek out all little bits of evidence to confirm your beliefs. It's similar to something called confirmation bias. We are seeing this every single day in the narrative that's promoted to promote the president's political agenda. And I think when you look at something like Hannity, it makes more sense when you view it like storytelling. Take anything close to journalism out of it, even though he says he's doing reporting. It's storytelling. He's advancing a story every single night about the president being the victim of a plot. It doesn't have a lot of connection to reality, but if you view him as an entertainer telling a story, it does make sense. He has to keep people obsessed with the story, and that's why he's now calling out the Durham probe as the next part of the story, right?
I get it. I know the playbook. Yeah. But the problem is that the viewers think that they're getting facts, and they're not getting facts when they hear that. They're
He likes to say the news continues now, and we're reporting, and he uses all these journalism terms that have nothing to do with journalism. Right.
So obviously, as we know, Congressman, the president is not fact-based. Here's what he's telling his voters and supporters today.
This was an overthrow of government. This was an attempted overthrow, and a lot of people were in on it, and they got caught. They got caught red-handed.
This was before he was elected, so I'm not sure about the chronology of overthrow of government. What do you hear there, Charlie?
Well, look, this is really unhelpful, and frankly, it's destructive to our institutions. There was no overthrow of government. There was no coup. The coup suggests that, really that that maybe some kind of military takeover is happening. It's crazy to say this sort of thing. What part of this report haven't they read? Yeah, they want to beat up on the FBI because of the way they handle surveillance warrants. I guess that's fair. But to suggest that the overall investigation, was driven by political bias and bad behavior by the FBI just simply doesn't speak to reality. I'll tell you what, there is another problem here, too. The Democrats over the years have been historically critical of the FISA process, and Republicans more defensive of it.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what Congress does about the FISA process going forward.
Yeah, that will be very interesting. Okay, now to the next conspiracy theory that's being peddled, and that is, as you know, the president and some of his supporters on Congress are trying to conflate what Russia did in terms of the wide-scale, top-down Kremlin supported interference in the 2016 election, and an op-ed from a former Ukrainian ambassador where they were concerned about candidate Donald Trump. Here is what the FBI director, Chris Wray, said yesterday about this conspiracy theory, actually on December 9th, about this conspiracy theory.
We have no information that indicates that Ukraine interfered with the 2016 presidential election. I think it's important for the American people to be thoughtful consumers of information, to think about the sources of it.
Okay, the FBI says that it wasn't Ukraine. But, Brian, here's the part that I think is interesting. Yeah. He says, I think it's important for the American people to be thoughtful consumers of information.
Right.
Yes, of course it is. They have to use critical thinking. However, he's saying that it's going to be up to voters and the people to determine the truth because we can't count on our leaders to give us the real information.
And that's at the heart of the problem of this digital age. And this is something that predates Trump, and it's getting worse in the Trump years. We are expected now in this Facebook and Twitter world to go and figure out the truth ourselves. It's all been laid at our own hands. And that's incredibly empowering sometimes and democratizing. It's also incredibly difficult and incredibly stressful for tens of millions of people who don't know what to believe. And Ray is right. But unfortunately, as long as there's a president who's leading a misinformation campaign to confuse the public, we're going to have these problems. And people like Sean Hannity are an outgrowth of that fundamental core problem. I'm glad Ray is identifying it correctly, and it's incredible. He's basically saying, don't believe right-wing media. This is the Trump-appointed FBI director saying, don't believe Trump's friends.
I mean, you and I talk about this all the time. It's about news literacy, and you have to know the difference between a real journalist, a real news program, and somebody who is just telling a story. And, you know, that's where we are right now.
It's just getting harder and harder out there every day, and I feel for the folks out there who don't want to have to invest all day long to know what is true and what is not.
Me too.
Right.
Brian Stelter, former Congressman Charlie Dent, thank you very much.
I got to say, those Christopher Wray statements are stunning, and I'd be shocked if the president doesn't respond in some way, because Christopher Wray just directly refuted the president of the United States. Meanwhile,